Georgia's economy to contract by 5% in 2020 and recover by 3.5% in 2021. Does this mean that the V-shaped recovery that we all anticipated on the early stage of COVID-19 is no longer case for Georgia and for the region?
The pandemic is still quite alive and now even hitting much stronger than before. And this means that economy will still suffer, although we don't expect and we don't take into our forecast that there will be an additional lockdown of a kind as we had in the second quarter. But economy will be hit still by this pandemic, not as much as in the second and third quarter. So we expect economic growth to remain in the negative territory till the first quarter of 21. And this is the main reason why we are going downward with our forecast for 21. 21, now the expectation is that in second quarter of next year, the economies will move to the positive territory, and this caused a substantial reduction downward. Therefore, as I said, this year we are quite close to what we expected in May, but next year, yes, we revised for the all countries of operation downward.
We read that a collapse in tourism weighed on growth in Georgia. Could you elaborate a little bit on that, and is it the only reason?
Well, tourism, as you mentioned, is quite important sector for Georgia. It's one of the backbones of the economy. However, it's not the only sector that suffers in this pandemic, and we can see that in second quarter, when the hit was the strongest, just a few sectors were in positive territory, like agriculture, mining, education, health, but all the rest sectors of the economy were in negative territory. They were declining with double digits, substantial double digits. And this means that the impact on the economy is broad-based. It's quite wide. Many sectors were hit, and the decline in many sectors is ranging from -20, -30, -40, which is extremely strong negative impact. So not just tourism, but it's much more broad-based.
Yes, because what I read from the document is that forecasts are also sensitive to whether governments impose further lockdowns or to how people may react to a continuation of the virus, possibly by self-imposed social distancing. What we hear from the Georgian government at this point, at least, is that further large-scale lockdown is not expected in Georgia. But if we look back, how would you evaluate? Do you think the lockdown at early stage served well Georgia?
Well, if we look from the health perspective, probably it served well because it had significant positive impact in many countries. And the number of new cases of COVID was not so high at that time. We see that now without lockdown, we have some spark of the number of cases. But on the economy, it was vice versa. Actually, the lockdown hit quite severely the economy in almost the whole world where lockdown was imposed. Therefore, it's a very difficult choice for the governments between the health implications and economic implications. As you mentioned, our baseline scenario is that we don't expect additional lockdown till the rest of the year, but as also you rightly indicated, probably there will be some self-restraining of the people and social distancing.
Where does Georgia stand in this overall picture of EBRD region, and how does it as compared to some other countries in the region?
It depends how we compare. If we compare Georgia with the neighboring region, which is in our terminology Eastern Europe and Caucasus, Georgia is somewhere in the middle. In the middle by the decline this year, but also by recovery next year. If we compare Georgia, for example, with other economies in EBRD region, which are open economies with very high proportion of trade in goods and services in their GDP, then we can see that Georgia is hit relatively less than other countries, especially if we compare with other countries dependent so much on tourism.
This time EBRD did a special survey which showed very interesting tendencies, like SME sector being hit the hardest, those with lower education and lower revenue hit the hardest, and so forth and so forth. What did the survey show?
For example, in Western Europe, there is accumulated wealth of the households. Also, companies are in a much stronger financial situation. And for them, it was relatively easier to sustain this impact from a crisis. While in EBRD countries of operations, we have to admit that the standard of living is relatively lower than compared with Western Europe, and also accumulated wealth is much smaller. The savings of the population are much smaller, so there are not such buffers that could help individuals in these difficult crisis situations. And of course, another factor is that Western Europe has much stronger capability to raise debt on the debt market compared with EBRD countries of operations.
Yeah, Georgia raised this debt quite well as well, and thanks to EBRD included in that package. But right now, when we see, for example, lari volatility, and also when we see that the recovery of the economy in coming years might not be as quick, as fast as anticipated before on the early stage of COVID-19. What would be your recommendation? How should Georgian government manage this debt?
The main recommendation would be for Georgia that after the COVID crisis is over, then the prudence of the public finance management that was present before the COVID crisis should return. Of course, GDP growth would play a significant role in this. So it's very important when this public debt management and savings in the budget are government is deciding upon them, that they should have in mind not to save on expenses, on investments that are creating, that are generating GDP growth and contributing to increase of GDP.
And just to sum up our conversation, and thank you again for your time for taking these questions. So what can Georgia do to avoid basically losing 2 years of development, since according to EBRD, Georgia will reach again the 2019 GDP per capita in 2022?
Yes, unfortunately, this crisis took a toll on most of the economies. And the basic recommendation would be that economies should increase their resilience to such shocks. EBRD is here to support, and of course, we provide debt financing, we provide equity financing, but we provide also a policy dialogue with the country, and we are ready to support these efforts of Georgia to diversify economy and to make it more resilient to such unexpected shocks.
Thank you for taking our questions.
Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you.